Development 2.0 is really about leveraging partnerships at the local level and grassroots, taking advantage of sort of the local ecosystems too and the local interlocutors, and helping. I guess it's, in my view, the key thing. Is like helping citizens solve their problems themselves, right? If it's about how to grow their economy, how to become more sort of engaged in government, use lessons that are there locally, but also use new techniques like collective intelligence and crowdsourcing and new technologies too to help accelerate these things.
So get specific about that. I mean, sounds good. Let's help local people do their own thing. Sounds fantastic. But how do you make it happen?
I'll give you an example. So in Armenia, it's very limited opportunities for economic growth. It's not, they're blocked on several sides, lots of geopolitical issues. But one potential area for growth was tourism, right? And the old way of doing development work in tourism and with the IFIs would be to fund big infrastructure mega projects for tourism, right? Like, I don't know, a new stadium or a new resort someplace in the hinterland, or in the capital. But what we did is that we, through our innovation lab, so using technology, but really just using sources that were there, what we did is we tracked where people were actually going and where they were from and where they were going within, like tourists, within the country, right? And we could sort of sift through this data. It took maybe 2 weeks of focused work to figure out that what tourists really wanted to do was really kind of local agritourism or ecotourism or cultural tourism in the villages in the hinterland. So they didn't want these mega projects. They didn't want these big urban settings. And so we took, it cost very little money to do that. It took 2 weeks, a little bit of ingenuity, local knowledge, a little bit of technology, and that's shifted hundreds of millions of dollars worth of the government's own investment money towards a whole new sector and a whole new way of thinking about how to grow their economy. So I think that's a concrete example.
Is there a mindset shift that Development 2.0 engenders that means that we can start thinking more in terms of hackathons and less in terms of funding huge infrastructure projects?
I think so. And I try to, be careful about words even like hackathons, right? Because hackathons sometimes give the impression that you've got, it's like a festival of ideas, which is great, and surface ideas for a couple of days, really intense. Everybody feels good about coming up with a great idea. But then how do you actually take those further, right? And do that real tech transfer that you're talking about. And it's hard in the developing world, right? It takes usually years to do something like this. And there's such barriers to entry. But I'll give you an example of where we're trying something pretty transformative, I hope, and unique. We started in response to COVID last month or so. We launched essentially a global challenge for coming up with open source hardware innovation for COVID-19.
That's why I brought up the hackathon in the first place, because you're doing it with.
Yeah. Well, but we're calling it more like a challenge, because let me. The difference is important in a sense, because Hackster is the world's largest platform community for developers and designers, especially in hardware, but not only. And what this community can help us do, and they're already passionate about doing it, is creating actual prototypes, right? Prototypes of solutions, like a system, like a touchless system for soap dispensing, hand washing, and drying hands, made in Ghana in a makerspace that can be easily replicated, produced in a country like Ghana, right? That's the sort of thing we're talking about. So the blueprints, designs, codes are all online, all open source. But then the next step is, how do you get that quickly then replicated, reproduced at scale, right? And that's the challenge that we're working on right now.
What really fascinates me about that kind of thing, your engagement with Hackster, and the way you set that up, was the pivot. Because again, when we think about development 1.0, we're thinking in terms of large scale, we're thinking in terms of institutional, we're thinking in terms of very formal and formatted approaches to things. And what you've done here is you suddenly turned on a dime, as they say, into coming up with a solution, or looking for solutions for a problem that suddenly took us all by surprise. And that kind of mental flexibility, I think, within the context of developing Asia and within the context of scaling the SDGs for meaningful impact, I think is absolutely necessary. Tell me how you think about partnering with outside organizations and how we can be flexible in the organization of these actions.
With Hackster, it's completely reliant on the clever use of partnerships, right? So if you think about it, what's the value of each of the partners here? The value of UNDP, in the first instance, is that it attracts the passionate hackers, developers, designers to focus on a global common goal. So it brings, a lot of them were already super interested in trying to solve problems with COVID, but kind of the branding or the recognition of the United Nations and the UN Development Program helped accelerate that more. So it's creating a bigger funnel for potential solutions. But that's how it, like at the front end. But then it also, what we can also help too is at the last mile, we're actually delivering these things with our teams on the ground. But each part of it has a different value that they bring, right? The designers themselves that are creating the solutions, the big tech companies that are providing the actual hardware and technology and stuff to make these things that are with us, they each have a role. But if we don't put all those together in a sort of magic formula, in the right formula, then it breaks down. But it also points out that so much of this is already going on, right?
Yeah, I mean,
so
everyone's talking about collaboration as being
these solutions are being made already too. So our job is just kind of amplify it in a sense in this case, right? Amplify it and accelerate it, right? And that's so the nature of the relationship between, say, the entrepreneurs, which are everywhere now, and the technology, which is everywhere now, and these big institutions that were created 50, 60 years ago, is like fundamentally changed, right? So development can be done anywhere by anybody now. You don't need these big institutions. So the big institutions, well, you need them, but for different ways. So these big institutions have to change, right? And unless to prove our value, we have to be nimble and agile too, right? And that's what I'm talking about.
Tell me a little bit more about the center here in Singapore. And the Singapore arm is just one arm of a global enterprise.
Yeah.
How are they leveraging partnerships to make a difference? And what is the strategy overall in this new enterprise?
So our overall mandate is, or investment thesis, whatever you want to call it, is how do we leverage tech and innovation more broadly to drive sustainability, right? But sustainability in the developing world, right? So it's a super outward-facing center in a sense. It's a joint venture with the Singapore government and the UNDP. First time that I think any dedicated outfit is in the UN is working on these questions. So it's all new. So what we've done is we've taken advantage of real priorities here in Singapore as the first point or points of advantage. Like we're working on smart and sustainable cities. So we brought in experts, global experts in this space. How do we think about creating smart and sustainable cities in the developing world? People have thought about that a lot, and there's some work on this, but I don't think but what we're actually going to do, what we're already working on, is working with 5 cities in Africa, 5 cities in Asia, to actually help them design these and implement and design them, right? Different focus for different cities. Focus could be on, how do we transform mobility? How do we transform tax revenue collection or waste management or food production, right? And it's not just about bringing the cool gadgets of smart cities from Singapore and the sensors and so forth to the developing world. That's not what it's about. But it's about, changing processes too and making smart citizens, right? Or helping develop smart citizens.
So you started off saying that what we're trying to do is empower citizens at ground level to be more influential and be more involved in making the change themselves, spotting the opportunities, initiating the solutions. But again, we've sort of come back to the idea that a lot of the leadership is coming from government. How do we balance those two things?
One of the things we've done too at UNDP that I hope is transforming things. We've created this global network of innovation labs, which we call accelerator labs, meant to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. But what's disruptive and transformative about that is that it's 60 of these labs covering 78 countries in the developing world. So it's this, it's like the world's biggest learning network. But so what it actually does, it marries kind of the old way of doing development with the economists and the governance experts that are already there in the country and in UNDP's offices with this whole new crew of entrepreneurs, developers, designers, hackers, data scientists, and putting them together to come up with solutions like the one I mentioned on tourism, and so that's, I think, how you do it. That's how you insist on making them locally driven solutions. That's one way of doing it.